Okay, guys, good morning. So, today we're going to be doing the verb aller, to go in French. Um, I missed yesterday because I just didn't feel like recording. I didn't post yesterday because I didn't feel like recording. But today we're going to be doing aller, to go. So, without further ado, let's jump into the lesson. And hopefully, this helps somebody improve their French as much as it is helping me. Again, I am using an app called Rocket Languages, and so basically I'm going through lesson by lesson, trying to improve my French. Just so you guys know, I've been in France for the last 2 years, 4 months. I came here to do my master's in sports industry management. I'm currently in the process of looking for a job. But to be in France, you need to be able to speak the local language. You can get by without speaking it, but if you want to have an authentic experience, I would always recommend that you learn the local language. So for that reason, I'm learning French on my own. Um, and yeah, it's been an interesting journey because when I came here, I spoke zero French, but now I can navigate conversations. Everybody's telling me I'm getting better, but I have a tendency to be very hard on myself. So maybe this is why I don't um, I take it with a pinch of salt. But without further ado, let's jump into this lesson on Ali to go, and hopefully this helps somebody as much as it has been helping me. So, bonjour, welcome back. Today we're going to be learning about another important verb, aller, which means to go in English. Once you've mastered this verb, you'll be able to talk about all kinds of things: where you're going, how you're going to get there, what you're going to do, and how you feel. Sounds a bit strange, obviously, but don't worry, we'll take you through this step by step. So, aller is an irregular verb. Like être to be and avoir to have, aller to go is a major irregular verb in French. As a matter of fact, it's the only ER verb that is truly irregular. But that doesn't mean that the way it's conjugated will be completely unrecognizable. Take a look at the conjugation tables below and see if you can spot any familiar patterns. So we're going to do the singular forms of aller, which means to go in English. And the first pronoun is je vais, which means I go in English. Then we have tu vas, which means you go in English. Il va, which means he goes in English. We have elle va, which means she goes in English. And we have on va, which means which means one goes in English. So now I'll run through the pronunciations in the app just to make sure that my pronunciation is correct. So the first one, je vais, je vais,
Je vais,
je vais. We have tu vas,
tu vas,
tu vas. We have il va,
il va,
we have elle va,
elle va,
and we have on va.
on va.
So again, je vais, I go, tu vas, you go, il va, he goes, elle va, she goes, on va, one goes. As you can see, none of these singular forms use a regular stem, which for this verb would all have been A-L-L. So aller is spelled A-L-L-E-R, just to give more context. And when I say je vais, it changes from A-L-L. There is no A-L-L stem. So for example, let's say I am finished. So je finis, right? So finir, the verb is spelled F-I-N-I-R. However, for IR verbs, you would use the stem, which is F-I-N-I, and it would be je finis, so it would be J-E-F-I-N-I-S, je finis, okay? However, for aller, because it is such an irregular verb, it changes from A-L-L-E-R to, if I want to say I go, it would be J-E for I, je, and it would be V, V-A-I-S. So je vais. So the verb changes completely when you start doing the conjugations. However, after this, you continue with using V. So basically, for tu vas, it will be T-U-V-A-S. Tu vas, you go. For il va, it will be I-L-V-A. He goes. For elle va, it would be E-L-L-E for she, V-A for go, so it would be she goes. On va would be O-N for one, and VA for goes, so it would be on va. Okay, I hope that was clear. So none of these verb forms use the regular ER endings, neither. Nevertheless, there are some aspects that aren't completely unusual for French verb conjugation. The je and the tu forms both ultimately end in S, and the il, elle, and on forms are identical to one another. So the spelling for go, for he goes, she goes, one goes, is the same, right? The verb spelling. So it's VA, VA, VA. However, for je and tu, the both of them end in an S. So this is a common thread that you will find when you're conjugating verbs in French. So we're going on to look at the plural forms of the verb. So for example, nous allons, which means we go. Vous allez, you go, which is formal / plural. We have ils vont, they go. And we have elles vont, which is they go feminine. Okay? So much like the previous section, I will go through the pronunciations. So nous allons, we go.
Nous allons.
Okay. Vous allez, you go, which is formal / plural. Vous allez.
Vous allez.
We have ils vont, which is they go.
Ils vont.
And we have elles vont, which is they go feminine.
Elles vont.
Okay. So for nous allons, for nous, for we, it's N-O-U-S. Allons would be L-L-O-N-S. For vous allez, we have V-O-U-S. Aller would be A-L-L-E-Z. And these endings are the common endings that you would find when you are conjugating verbs in French, right? Particular verbs, not all verbs, but particular verbs. With the O-N-S ending, the E-Z ending, and for example, ils vont, O-N-T, elles vont, O-N-T, sometimes it's E-N-T, depending on the verb, whether it's an ER verb, an IR verb, or RE verb. Okay. And for ils vont, we have I-L-S, V-O-N-T, they go. For elles vont, we have E-L-L-E-S, V-O-N-T. Again, these are two separate words in every single instance. It's two separate words, okay? Like if I say nous allons, it's two separate words. Vous allez, two separate words. Ils vont, two separate words. Elles vont, two separate words. Again, to reinforce, nous allons, we go. Vous allez, you go, which is the formal / plural version of the verb. We have ils vont, they go, elles vont, they go feminine. Let's continue. So the set of conjugations might look more familiar to you. In fact, the nous and the vous forms behave exactly like they would if they were a regular ER verb, which is the point I was trying to make before. The form used for il and elle is once again playing by its own rules. However, you must have noticed how similar it is to the ILS and the ELLS forms used for et. So for example, for et to be, you would say ils sont. Okay, ils sont, elles sont. Plus the fact that it uses the same V stem as the singular forms above should help make it a bit easier to remember. Okay, because most of these verbs like aller, for example, avoir, être, it's important to know these verbs by heart. What I'm struggling with currently is knowing the different permutations of the verbs. So for example, the passé composé. Passé composé and I have a really, really bad relationship. This is basically being able to talk about things that happened in the past in French. And the future. Sometimes I think if I'm able to learn the different forms, for example, passé composé, which is past, present, future tense, once I'm able to remember and internalize it, most of the verbs play by certain rules. So it'd be easy for me once I memorize it, but I haven't been investing time in memorizing those verbs just yet. Maybe I would in the near future. Now, as usual, all of the plural verb forms, plus the je and tu forms above, end in silent letters, which means we have to wonder about la liaison. Things aren't very tricky here. Like with most verbs, it's impossible to use la liaison between the verb forms and any vowel initial word that follows them. However, it will still make your French sound a bit overly formal if you do this. So if you use la liaison, it makes your French sound overly formal. It doesn't make it sound inauthentic, it just sounds overly formal. And depending on the setting that you're in, speaking in a overly formal way might serve you well. So for example, when I worked at the Olympics, I worked in the protocol coordination center. So I had to deal with heads of state, sports ministers, heads of government. And sometimes when you call the embassy and you're talking on the phone, the expectation is that your French will be super formal. Unfortunately, at that time, my level didn't permit me to speak in a super formal way. So most of the times, I would have to ask my colleagues for help. Okay, but again, I gave that example to talk about depending on the setting that you're in, it might serve you well to be able to speak super formal French. So remember, if you decide to use la liaison, you should never do it with the to form of the verb. With that, you know all about the verb conjugations. Now it's time to use some examples and see them in action, okay? So the first example is nous allons à Orléans. Et vous?
Nous allons à Orléans. Et vous?
Okay, so nous allons à Orléans means we are going to Orleans. Et vous means and you, but et vous is the formal way of saying and you in French, okay? So again, nous allons à Orléans et vous? Let me work on my pronunciation. Nous allons à Orléans et vous? Okay.
Nous allons à Orléans. Et vous?
Okay, again, to reinforce, nous allons à Orléans. The first part of the sentence means we are going to Orléans. And the second part of the sentence, et vous means and you. Okay. Next sentence. Elle va chez la médecin. Sorry. Il va chez la médecin. Il va chez la... No, il va chez le médecin. Il va chez le médecin. Let's listen to the pronunciation.
Il va chez le médecin.
Il va chez le médecin, which means he is going to the medical doctors. Il va chez le médecin. Voilà. Next sentence. Ils vont à l'école. Ils vont à l'école.
Ils vont à l'école.
Ils vont à l'école, which means they are going to school. Ils vont à l'école means they are going to school. Ils vont à l'école. Voilà. Next sentence. Tu vas à la fête. Tu vas à la fête, which means are you going to the party? Tu vas à la fête.
Tu vas à la fête?
Okay. Let me work on my pronunciation. Tu vas à la fête. Okay, good. Next sentence. Je vais en France cet été. Non. Je vais en France cet été. Je vais en France cet été.
Je vais en France cet été.
Okay. Je vais en France cet été. All right. T becomes pronounced because of été starts with a vowel. So they do la liaison. Okay. So the sentence is je vais en France cet été, which means I am going to France this summer. Again, je vais en France cet été. I am going to France this summer.
Je vais en France cet été.
Okay. Je vais en France cet été. Okay, good. Next sentence. On va au cinéma. On va au cinéma.
On va au cinéma.
Which means we are going to the movies. On va au cinéma. Voilà. Next sentence. Elles vont au Canada. Elles vont au Canada, which means they are going to Canada.
Elles vont au Canada.
Elles vont au Canada. Elles vont au Canada. Again, elles vont au Canada means they are going to Canada. Next sentence. Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi? Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi? And I did asking questions in French previously. I posted that video. And once you hear a sentence starting with est-ce que, you know that that question is being asked to you. And est-ce que literal translations means is it that, okay? So est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi?
Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi?
Which means are you going to Marseille too? Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi? Okay. Okay. Va-t-il aux États-Unis? Va-t-il aux États-Unis? Which means is she going to the United States? Va-t-elle aux États-Unis? Va-t-elle aux États-Unis? I believe that's what it is.
Va-t-elle aux États-Unis?
Va-t-elle aux États-Unis? All right, because États-Unis starts with a vowel, so the X, the AUX, aux sounds like aux États-Unis. Okay, so it's va-t-elle aux États-Unis, which means is she going to the United States?
Va-t-elle aux États-Unis?
Okay. Va-t-elle aux États-Unis? Good. So, now let's talk a bit more about how aller to go is used. So, you use aller if you're going to talk about going somewhere. The verb aller, to go, is of course the perfect way to talk about going to destinations. When you talk about this in English, you know that you have to add the word to before the place that you intend to visit. For example, I am going to the beach, or I am going to Mexico. Something similar happens in French, although exactly what word you use for to can change depending on where you're going, okay? There are four main destination categories: locations / events, cities, countries, people houses / businesses. So let's take a quick look at how you use the different forms. I shouldn't say use the different forms, but let's take a look at how it changes for each destination category you use. So if you're going to an event, you're going to talk about going to a location, for example, a museum, a movie theater, etc. An event being a concert, a party. You would use the word a, which is a, which I really need to remember what this thing is. Let me just Google this really quick. So just to give some context, I am just doing a quick search online to make sure I can explain this properly. Okay. 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 Let me continue the lesson. So basically, it's an A with a in Spanish you say accent. I need to really remember what that is. So A in English means to or at, together with a definite article, the, okay, in French. So if you're talking about going to an event or location, let's get back to this. For example, a location would be like a museum, a movie theater, etc. An event would be a concert, a party. You will use the word a with the accent, which means to or at, together with a definite article, and the definite article would be de in French, okay? So here's a few examples. On va au cinéma, which means we are going to the movies.
On va au cinéma.
On va au cinéma. Then we have ils vont à l'école. Ils vont à l'école.
Ils vont à l'école.
Which means they are going to school. Ils vont à l'école. And each time I say a, it's because we're using a to talk about if we're going to, example, the cinema, or if we're going to, for example, the movies, or if we're going to, for example, school. So like in the two examples above, we have on va au cinéma, ils vont à l'école, and I'll have to come back to on va au cinéma to explain that a bit, okay? And the last example, is tu vas à la fête, which we did previously.
Tu vas à la fête?
And tu vas à la fête means are you going to the party? Alright, okay. So notice how the article is included in French in sentences like ils vont à l'école, they are going to school, because we're talking about the concept of school in general. This might take a little getting used to, obviously. Below are a few more examples for practice. So, elle va à la plage. Elle va à la plage, which means she's going to the beach.
Elle va à la plage.
Elle va à la plage. Then we have je vais au travail, which means I am going to work.
Je vais au travail.
Je vais au travail. And we have on va au concert,
On va au concert.
which means we are going to the concert. On va au concert. Okay. Let's continue. Going to a city. If you're talking about going to a city in French, things are much easier. In that case, you put the A with the accent, which means A in English means to or at, before the city name. There's nothing else to do. Here are some examples of this that you've already seen. So, for example, nous allons à Orléans. Et vous, which we covered before.
Nous allons à Orléans. Et vous?
So, for example, the Orléans is a city, okay? So if you're going to Orléans, if you're going to Paris, if you're going to London, you would use the a with the accent, okay? Me doing this, like, you guys understand what I'm talking about. Nous allons à Orléans, et vous? Okay, next sentence. Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi?
Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi?
Est-ce que vous allez à Marseille aussi? Which means, are you going to Marseille too? Which we covered previously. Nice and simple, okay? So that you can get this fixed in your memory, here are a few more example sentences. Vas-tu à Nice ce week-end? Which means, are you going to Nice this weekend?
Vas-tu à Nice ce week-end?
And vas-tu is literally the inversion of are you, well, tu vas is are you going. It's just one of the ways of asking questions in French. You can use the inversion method, which is what they're doing here. Vas-tu, okay? Vas-tu à Nice ce week-end? Which is, are you going to Nice this weekend? Nous allons à Geneviève. Geneviève.
Nous allons à Genève.
Wow. Nous allons à Genève, which means we are going to Geneva. Nous allons à Genève. Then we have elles vont à Tours.
Elles vont à Tours?
Elles vont à Tours. Elles vont à Tours. I need to do that over. Elles vont à Tours, which means are they going to Tours? Right, going to a country. Like all nouns in French, country names are either masculine or feminine. There's a nice little trick to tell which gender a country has. In general, any country that ends in E is feminine. There are only a few exceptions to this, one prominent one being le Mexique, Mexico. Why is this important? Well, French follows these rules. If you're going to a masculine country, you use the preposition a with the accent, which means to or at, combined with the masculine the masculine form of the in French, which is le. And once you combine a and le, you get au. So the combination of a and le in French, you get auo. If you're going to a feminine country, use the preposition en, which means in. If you're going to a country whose name is plural, you use the preposition a, which means to at, combined with the plural les, les, which is the in English, and you get auxo, okay? Once again, you've already seen examples of these, which were above. So I'll run through that again because it is important, okay? If you're going to a masculine country, you use the preposition a, which means to or at, combined with the masculine le, which means the in English, and you get, when you combine those two, you get au, o. If you're going to a feminine country, use the preposition en, which means in English, and that is pronounced on. And if you're going to a country whose name is plural, you use the preposition a, which is to or at in English, and you combine that with the plural les, which is the in English, and you get AUXO. Okay, so for example, elles vont au Canada.
Elles vont au Canada.
Elles vont au Canada, which means they are going to Canada. Then we have je vais en France cet été.
Je vais en France cet été.
Je vais en France cet été. And this means I'm going to France this summer. Va-t-il aux États-Unis?
Va-t-elle aux États-Unis?
Va-t-elle aux États-Unis means she is going to the United States. And let's continue. The next example is elle va en Angleterre, which means she is going to England.
Elle va en Angleterre.
Elle va en Angleterre. The next example is je vais au Mexique.
Je vais au Mexique.
Je vais au Mexique. Then we have est-ce que vous allez aux Pays-Bas?
Est-ce que vous allez aux Pays-Bas?
Est-ce que vous allez aux Pays-Bas? And est-ce que vous allez aux Pays-Bas means are you going to the Netherlands? And the last example is, well, not the last example, but another example is ils vont en Israël.
Ils vont en Israël.
Ils vont en Israël. Ils vont en Israël. And so, ils vont en Israël. So, for example, there's just one fairly rare instance that you need to watch out for. If you're going to a masculine country whose name starts with a vowel, for example, like Israel, then you can't pair it with O. And O is to or at. Instead, you will have to use on. So, this is why elles vont en Israël. You use on instead of O. Okay. It's also worth noting that the rules for country names apply to province and state names as well. This can be important when a city and a country, province or state share the same name. So, for example, il va au Québec. He is going to the province of Quebec.
Il va au Québec.
Il va au Québec. Then we have il va à Québec.
Il va à Québec.
Il va à Québec. So il va au Québec means he's going to the province. You use that when if you're talking about he's going to the province of Quebec. Okay? But if you want to say he's going to Quebec City, you would say il va à Québec. So even though it's Quebec, depending on the context, you would use O for the province, but you would use A for the city. So the final category is a bit different from the others because it involves using an entirely different word. If you talk about going to someone's house or business, you will use the word chez, which is CHEZ, followed by the person's name or profession. Note that if you're talking about their profession, you'll need to use a definite article, which is de. So it has to be paired with chez and the definite article le. So the example is il va chez le médecin. He's going to the medical doctors. So it has to be chez with the definite article le, and in this instance, he's going to the medical doctors. So the full sentence in French is il va chez le médecin.
Il va chez le médecin.
Il va chez le médecin, which means he is going to the medical doctors. As you can see, chez means more than just to. Here, it implies to the person's house or place of work. Here's a few more examples. Pay close attention to how they work. On va chez Marc ce soir. On va chez Marc ce soir. We are going to Mark's house this evening.
On va chez Marc ce soir.
On va chez Marc ce soir. Next example. Ils vont chez le coiffeur. Ils vont chez le coiffeur.
Ils vont chez le coiffeur.
Which means they are going to the hairdressers. Ils vont chez le coiffeur. Ils vont chez le coiffeur. Then we have elle va chez Anne. Elle va chez Anne.
Elle va chez Anne.
Elle va chez Anne. Which means she's going to Anne's house. Notice how you don't hear the Z in chez in the final sentence above. The general rule is that la liaison must occur between chez and a word following it if that word begins in a vowel sound. However, if the word is a name, the rule doesn't apply. Okay. So if the word coming after chez is a regular word and not a name, you do la liaison. If it's a name and it starts with a vowel, you don't do la liaison. So, using different means of transport. When you're talking about going places, you need to specify how you get there. For example, you might go by bus, go by foot, or go by train. To talk about this in French, you'll once again use aller to go. However, you'll need to choose between two different prepositions for by. You will need to choose between two different prepositions for by, like I go by train or I go by foot. So the prepositions that you would use is a, which is to or at, on, which is in. Thankfully, there are some handy rules that can help you here. If you get inside the means of transport, you use en, on. So for example, nous allons en train. We go by train.
Nous allons en train.
Nous allons en train. So if you get in the train, you say we go by train, okay? You say nous allons en train. If you get in the train, you say nous allons en train. If you go by bus, you say tu vas en bus.
Tu vas en bus?
Tu vas en bus. And tu vas en bus means are you going by bus? Then we have vous allez en voiture tous les jours.
Vous allez en voiture tous les jours.
Which means you go by car every day. Vous allez en voiture tous les jours. Okay. If you ride on top of the modes of transport, or at least can't get inside it, you use a. So for example, if you want to say, does he still go by bike? You would say, est-ce qu'il y a? No, sorry, you'll say, est-ce qu'il va tour? No. You would say, est-ce qu'il va toujours à vélo? Est-ce qu'il va toujours à vélo? Because you don't get in the bike, you get on top of the bike, okay? So, est-ce qu'il va toujours à vélo? And this just goes to reinforce how specific the language is. Like, every single thing in French has a word. So, for example, in everyday French, and I think I mentioned this previously, people say truc, right? And truc means stuff or things or whatever. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and in talking to her, trying to practice my French, I used truc to describe something. And she had to explain to me, okay, I know you hear truc in everyday French, but everything in French has a word. So try to assign the word to the thing that you're trying to say. So, back to this lesson. Est-ce qu'il va à toujours à vélo? Which means, does he still go by bike?
Est-ce qu'il va toujours à vélo?
Est-ce qu'il va toujours à vélo? Then we have, elle va à cheval, which means she goes by horse. Elle va à cheval.
Elle va à cheval.
Elle va à cheval. Then we have, je vais au travail à pied. Je vais au travail à pied, which means I will go to work by foot or I walk to work.
Je vais au travail à pied.
Je vais au travail à pied. Note that you will hear some French speakers choose to use on instead of a when talking about going by bike, by motorcycle, etc. Technically speaking, this isn't incorrect. It's just not recommended by some grammarians. If you decide to use this method yourself, just be aware that there are two modes of transport that you must never use on, which is IN in English, no matter what. À pied by foot, à cheval by horse. So on meaning EN, you don't use it if you're talking about I'm going, you wouldn't say I'm going on. In French, you wouldn't say I'm going on foot, à pied, or you wouldn't say I'm going on horse, in horse, okay? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, in English, they proceeded on foot. Yeah, it works, but translating from English to French directly does not work. And just last night, I was the victim of that because I wanted to say there was a lot of fog yesterday. So I was like, c'était très brouillard dehors. And my friends were like, I know what you're trying to say, but translating from French to English, sorry, from English to French does not work all the time. So it doesn't work. Maybe 2 out of 10 times it will work, but don't try to translate directly from English to French. That shit doesn't work. Okay. We noted about the bus is a short form. The full word for bus in French is autobus. However, you're more likely to hear people say bus in conversation. So, okay, in French, people will say autobus. This is the actual long form of saying bus in French, but you will hear people using bus instead of autobus. Okay, just to note. Talking about how people are. In what might seem a little odd twist, the verb être to be isn't used to talk about how people are or how they're doing in French. Instead, aller, to go, is. So if you ask someone how they are, you literally will be asking them how they're going. So, comment vas-tu? How are you going?
Comment vas-tu?
Comment vas-tu? And we have comment allez-vous,
Comment allez-vous?
which means how are you? Comment allez-vous? And the reason there are two different ways two different examples here, because comment vas-tu is the informal way. Like if you're speaking to a friend or if you see somebody that you know or you are around the same age, you may say comment vas-tu. But if it's somebody that you don't know and if it's somebody senior to you, you would typically use comment allez-vous because that's the formal way of asking this question, okay? Okay. Below are some possible replies to these questions. Just like in English, you have the option of responding in a complete sentence or just with a word or two. So for example, somebody says, comment vas-tu? You say, je vais bien, I am well.
Je vais bien.
Je vais bien. And to reinforce what was said before, and you're not talking about, you're not using the verb être. So you wouldn't say, je suis bien. Je suis bien doesn't work, okay? You use the verb aller to talk about how you're going. So somebody says, comment vas-tu? You say, je vais bien and not, je suis bien. Another example to respond to this question is pas mal, which means not bad.
Pas mal.
Pas mal. The next sentence to respond to this question is je ne vais pas très bien, which means I'm not doing very well. Je ne vais pas très bien.
Je ne vais pas très bien.
Je ne vais pas très bien. Good. The negative sentence above might look a little scary, but don't worry. You'll learn all about negatives and how they work quite soon. So negation in French, it's ne and pas. The ne and pas hugs the verb ne and pas. Okay. This is just my quick 2 seconds on this. What's important to note here is that you can't answer these questions with the word bon, B-O-N, bon, which means good, or the full phrase je vais bon, which literally means I go good. This would be incorrect grammar. Instead, you'll need to train your brain to use the word bien, which is well, when you want to say I am good. Now, the questions we've shown you above tend to sound a little formal. You can also use the very common and very casual way of saying it, which is comment ça va?
Comment ça va?
Which I'm sure a lot of people would know. Comment ça va? Which means how is it going? Or simply ça va.
Ça va?
Ça va? And in everyday French, living here, you would hear people would normally ask comment ça va, especially if you're friends. Comment ça va? Tu vas bien? Ça va? In a very with a question tone. And all of that means how's it going? How's it going? How's it going? Comment ça va? Ça va? Tu vas bien? It's how is it going? Okay. This phrase can even work as an answer to. So, for example, somebody says to you, ça va? You would say, ça va, and ça va means it's going, okay?
Ça va.
Again, ça va. Ça va. Or if you want to be extra, je vais très bien. C'est très génial en ce moment. I mean, depends on whatever you want to say to express how you feel. But normally, the common response would be ça va. Tu vas bien? Oui, ça va. Et toi? Okay. Et vous? Okay. Talking about the future, the simplest way to express that something is going to happen in the future is to use the verb to go, which is aller. Just like we did in these sentences. This is true in both English and French, which makes life a little easier. In order to express what is going to happen in French, you follow this formula. So, aller conjugated. So, for example, aller, je vais, plus the infinitive. Let's put it into practice. Say that you want to say she is going to travel. To do this, we will need to follow elle form of aller with the infinitive, the unchanged form of the verb for travel, which is voyager. So, for example, you would use aller, the conjugation version of she is going. So you would say elle va, and you use the unconjugated version of travel, voyager. So elle va voyager, which means she is going to travel.
Elle va voyager.
Elle va voyager. Okay, as you can see, it's very similar to English. Here are some more examples. Elles vont chanter la chanson, which means they are going to sing the song. Elles vont chanter la chanson.
Elles vont chanter la chanson.
Elles vont chanter la chanson. Elles vont chanter la chanson, which means they are going to sing the song. We have vous allez conduire à l'aéroport à quelle heure? Oh, that was a mouthful. Vous allez conduire à l'aéroport à quelle heure?
Vous allez conduire à l'aéroport à quelle heure?
Which means, what time are you going to drive to the airport? Vous allez conduire à l'aéroport à quelle heure? Vous allez conduire à l'aéroport à quelle heure? Which means, what time are you going to drive to the airport? Then we have, on va étudier le français ensemble. We are going to study French together.
On va étudier le français ensemble.
On va étudier le français ensemble. And that brings us to the end of the lesson. But just to run through some of the key things which came out. Aller to go is an irregular verb. Different words are used with aller to go to mean to, depending on where you are talking about going. Different words are used with aller to go to mean by, depending on the form of transportation you're using. Aller to go is used rather than et to be to talk about how people are. And aller to go is used together with an infinitive to talk about the future. For example, elle va voyager. Okay, so as with every lesson, we end our lesson with a culture aspect of France. So we're going to talk about the cafe culture in Paris, which is really, really big in Paris, particularly when it's sunny. Okay, so cafes date back to the 17th century in France, and they once served as both centers of social activity and incubators for cultural ideas and political movements. Everything from gossip to philosophy was on a menu, and patrons could come to relax or even spark a revolution. Today, cafes in France still retain much of their charm. You can't really experience French culture without spending at least a little time in some of its famous cafes. And if you become a resident, you're likely to find cafes become part of your own lifestyle. They are an excellent venue for meeting friends, killing time before appointments, or just taking a moment to chill and relax à la française, in the French way. The fact that most cafes have outdoor seating as well as indoor also makes them ideal locations for sitting back and people watching. You'll find that many cafes in Paris and other large French cities offer more than just coffee and nibbles. Some have full kitchens and liquor bars, and patrons are often just as likely to enjoy a quiet glass of wine as they are to ask for a cup of coffee. Incidentally, you order un café in France, you'll likely get a small cup of strong espresso, as that is the preferred type of coffee among the French. But there are other common options too, including un café noisette, an espresso with hot milk, making the drink hazelnut in color, similar to a macchiato, un café crème, an espresso with milk foam, similar to a cappuccino, un café allongé, an espresso with hot water, similar to an Americano. And if all of this caffeine sounds like a little too much for you, you can order un deca, a decaffeinated espresso. I mean, who really orders this? So come to France with your taste buds primed and ready, and make sure to spend some time relaxing like the French in a true, authentic cafe. So I'll run through some of the pronunciations that I think I probably butchered during that reading of the culture lesson. So the first one is le café,
Le café.
which means the coffee or café. Le café. Then we have le café noisette,
Le café noisette.
which means the hazelnut coffee or macchiato. Le café noisette. Then we have le café crème,
Le café crème. Le café crème.
which means the cream coffee or cappuccino. Le café crème. We have le café allongé,
Le café allongé.
which means the long coffee or the Americano. Le café allongé. Then we have le deca,
Le déca.
which is decaf coffee. Who really wants decaf coffee? Le deca. Okay,
Le déca.
I need to pronounce this again. Le deca. I'll try that one more time.
Le déca.
Le deca. Okay. Le deca. Okay. And then we have à la française,
À la française.
which is in the French way. À la française. Okay, good. And this brings us to the end of our lesson on aller. Very interesting. I hope that it helps you as much as it helps me. And yeah, just keep practicing, keep pushing people. Learning a language is a very challenging venture, a very challenging exercise. But consistency and taking confidence in yourself and putting in the work is really what gonna make you get fluent. So do your language class today, be on it, get better, and hopefully you would be fluent as soon as you can. Have a good day, guys.